Can Dallas Cowboys quarterback Dak Prescott finally get this team over the hump? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys. Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can follow him on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Starting today, we're going to be doing some exit interviews. We're going to go position by position, answering some of the biggest questions about each position as we go into the offseason. And up first is quarterback, which is always a hot button one here.
We started with the easiest one first, apparently, but not so much.
Before we get into what's going to happen with Dak and all that kind of stuff, I want to talk about how he performed on the field in 2023. Do you think this was the best version of Dak that we've seen yet?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that at certain points, especially, in the regular season, during the middle of the regular season, in some of the games we saw near the end was some of the best Dak we've seen, right? Some of the most, kind of vintage moments where it just felt like he was at the height of his skills, right? Like he had complete command of the offense and had all the answers. We talked about it a lot. He felt like he was a guy that was running an offense in which he knew the solution, right? And that he knew where he needed to go. I think if you look in comparison to what was happening specifically in like Philadelphia, right? Like Jalen Hurts to me looked like a quarterback with ability, but he didn't have command necessarily of what was happening in the offense. And that's, when you saw things get tight, he struggled, and I think that that's something where Dak, especially in the regular season, had answers. Even when things got tight or when there was pressure around him, he knew where to go with the football most of the time. And I think especially once the Cowboys decided to kind of start feeding CeeDee Lamb specifically more, and the changes that they kind of made in the offense after the bye, I think that is, probably the best version of Dak. That stretch, right, is probably the best version of Dak we've seen so far.
Yeah, I mean, they had, was it the number one scoring offense, I believe, at the end of the year. And they didn't really have a running game. I mean, Tony Pollard played all 17 games, but especially early in the season, it was not an efficient rushing attack at all. And some of the best Dak that we've seen, whether it was in 2016, 2018, or in 2021, it's when they could run the ball really well and throw the ball. It wasn't the case for most of this season, and yet the offense still put up a bunch of points. They had a lot of injuries on the offensive line, which we are used to the Cowboys having injuries on the offensive line, especially at left tackle. But this was the most banged up that Zach Martin's ever been, right? He missed multiple games. Terrence Steele did play all 17 games, but he was clearly worse than what absolutely clearly worse than he was last season. And again, it didn't really matter. They had a rookie tight end, a second-year tight end, and Jake Ferguson. And he still put up really good numbers. And again, I know everybody's want to talk about the playoffs, but in terms of the regular season, the big sample size of 17 games, I thought this was Dak's best year.
Yeah, and look, there's the old saying, you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and like we got to talk about the baby. Like there's a reason that we are frustrated. There is a reason that we are upset with the way things ended, and that's because of how good things were during the regular season. And I think that we need to identify that, right? Like that's part of the issue. I think we as fans have kind of being objective and trying to solve some of this stuff, right? Is that you get so emotional about the last thing that happened that you overreact and think and forget about all the positive things that did happen in the regular season. And I think that, what we saw from Dak when things were good was about as good as you could ask for, and I think the question moving forward is, how do we get that regular season version of this Dak Prescott and this offense into the postseason? And I think that's now the goal, right? Now that we've decided that we're kind of reloading this team, this is the group that we're coming back in. It's how do we kind of transcribe the success that we've had during the regular season into the postseason? This isn't a case of whether Dak Prescott is a good enough quarterback to do what he needs to do. Like, we've seen him do it. It's just about doing it at the appropriate time, and in conjunction with the rest of the team in the playoffs when things obviously get a lot tighter.
Here's my next question for you about Dak. This is not a team success question, but Dak specifically. Is this the ceiling for Dak? Do you think he can still get better as a quarterback? Because my fear is that he's already lost a lot of athleticism, but he's been able to make up for it because of his accuracy and timing in the offense. Can we expect him to improve anymore, or is this kind of what he is now?
I think that this is the part that's hard, right? Like, is that, to me, the step that he needs to take now, like, it's about what's between his ears, like, I just, like, for me, like, I think his ability and his ability to kind of continue to play and operate in the way that he's been playing, like, especially this last season, I think he could probably do that for another 2 years.
Well, he's 30 right now. He turns 31 in July. I really feel like his age 31, 32, and probably age 33 season, like, the difference in athleticism and arm strength isn't going to really be, it's going to be very, very, very small. But I think you're right. It's between the ears. It's the confidence. It's seeing the defense clear. That's probably how he improves.
Look, I mean, as much as we could talk about it, like, we should definitely talk about this in the second segment, because I do think that as much as we are at times alternating Dak defenders and then Dak, bluntly honest about Dak, right? I think that as much as we continue to talk about how Dak has the ability, he can do all this, and he's done all this even without a lot of help at times, we also have to identify the fact that there is something that is going on with Dak in these playoff games, and I think that that's something we can't just look away from. And it's something that, unfortunately, we're not going to know if we ever made any progress on until you get into the playoffs. So, but I do think that's a big part of this conversation about whether Dak can get over the hump or not.
I do want to mention that we have seen several quarterbacks, like, statistically, have their best seasons at, like, age 33, 34. I think Tony Romo in 2014, I believe he was 34, and that was his best year because by that time he had just seen everything there is to see on the, against every defense. He knew the offense so well. So I don't want to make it seem like, there's no chance that Dak could ever get better from what we are right now. I just think I wouldn't be surprised if it kind of plateaus a little bit, and there's, peaks and valleys a little bit over the next couple of years. But listen, the NFL honors are tonight. Like, would it surprise you at all if Dak finishes as, like, the number 2 candidate in the MVP race? Like, if he peters out at that, it's okay. That's not a bad spot to be in, just to be clear.
Well, to me, I think ultimately what we need to see from Dak is not that he needs to get higher peaks. It's that we need to raise the floor on the moments when things go bad. Like, and so to me, that's like, I don't need to see Dak get better. I need to see Dak get more consistent. That's what I need to see. And that's the better that we need to see moving forward. Is he's reached the heights that you need to reach to win the Super Bowl. You just need to be more consistent to win the Super Bowl. That's what we need to see from Dak next season.
All right, Leah, this is going to be probably the hardest question I've ever asked you on the podcast. Can Dak Prescott get the Dallas Cowboys over the hump? We will discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. That includes the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is your always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right into the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. I have one. Absolutely love it. Also check out the 2024 Nissan Armada. It's some change that you expect from a full-size SUV. Picture a rugged 4x4 that you can sit up to 8 people in first-class luxury and style. Tow bigger and explore further in the 2024 Armada. Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Shop nissanusa.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now you can find it on Amazon Fire TV. Locked On Sports today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find the Locked On Sports Today channel now on Amazon Fire TV. All right, Landon, let's discuss Dak in his future. Do you believe that he can take the Dallas Cowboys over the hump to an NFC Championship game, to the Super Bowl, and eventually win one?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that they can, and I think that Dak can. Look, I mean, I'm an old head at this point, so I definitely remember Steve Young and remember the whole situation that he dealt with being the best quarterback in football for multiple years, living in the shadow of Joe Montana, playing in San Francisco, and never having gotten over the hump, right? Never being able to kind of find a way to either beat those Dallas teams or to beat Green Bay and kind of get into the Super Bowl and win it. And then, until he did, until he did start winning and started turning it around. So do I think it's a possible outcome with this quarterback? Absolutely. I mean, look, there's, like we said, we've seen this situation, play out a couple different times in the past with other quarterbacks, and then with Dak, we've seen him play well enough to win these kind of games, to get in there and to beat these teams. It's just there's some kind of mental block, or look, let's unpack this a little bit, all right? Because you and I have talked around this subject matter for a lot, but I think let's actually get into it. There's something about Dak playing in these big games where I think it was a friend of yours or someone that was related to you that referred to him as he gets sweaty, or
sweaty Dak. Yeah,
he gets sweaty Dak, and I think there is very much something to it. I think in each of these games, and I pulled up all these playoff losses, right? And do you want to know what the common theme is for all of them, Marcus?
It's the slow starts on offense, right?
Exactly. You look, you go back to these games, right? And it's punt, interception, punt, interception. That's the first game that was the first few drives for the Cowboys Packers game that just happened,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you've got against the 49ers, punt, interception. Against the 49ers the other time, it was punt, and it's just like you go through these games.
Even the Buccaneers game last year that they won, they went
right.
punt without a first down on the first two drives of the game. Luckily, the defense held until the offense could kind of get out of their slump, but it was the same thing. It was like, I think it was like their 8th play before they got more than 3 yards on a play.
Yeah, it's and again, we've blocked it out because we won the game, but I know that I wasn't the only person who was at the beginning of that Buccaneers going, here we go again. Like scared that this was happening again. It didn't turn out that way, but that doesn't make any of us feel any better about the fact that Dak Prescott clearly, and we can't ignore this or pretend like it's not happening, because the stats, the tape, all of it backs this up. There's no argument to this. Dak struggles early in these playoff games. And there are times when the Cowboys are able to recover because their defense plays well enough, or their offense suddenly explodes in the second half in a way that can make up for it. But there are times that they can't. And ultimately, the margins of victory in the NFL are too small for this. The margins of victory in the playoff, despite what some of the blowout playoff games this year tell you, the margins of victory are too tight to try to get away with that. And frankly, if anything, it showed you that when you do that in this year, you get blown out of the water by the 7th seed at home, right? So this is all a long way of saying, like, it's hard because Dak is MVP caliber. Dak is, like you said, he's going to be, a potential guy walking the stage tonight in the NFL Honors Awards. But this is something that's very real. This is something that is happening with Dak Prescott at the most important games of his career that has to stop. And I don't know, there's no indicator or kind of tea leaf reading for us at any point during the season to know whether he's ever gotten over that hump until we get back into the playoffs again. We take those first few snaps and see how things go.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of things there. You could just tell, and I remember I was sitting with my brother watching the playoff game this year. It just felt like Dak's mind was moving faster than his body, and you could see it in his reads. Like, he was going through his reads so quickly and not letting the plays develop, right? And the offense just felt rushed. Everything about it felt rushed. And again, you mentioned some of the rough starts early in the games. Go back to his first playoff start. They were down 21-3 against Green Bay at home in 2016. I think early on in Dak's career, I think he did a better job in some of these big games because he would run more and he would get hit a little bit, and that would kind of get him into the game and slow him down a little bit. But as he's gotten older, he's actually run the ball less. And I think he gets very amped up for these games. And which I understand, I want my quarterback to be excited to play in these big games. But what you really want, Landon, is the guy that just feels so calm and cool. Like, his heartbeat never gets over 60 beats a minute, right? And that's what Joe Burrow has. It's what Patrick Mahomes has. And actually, I think it's what Josh Allen lacks a little bit. I think Josh Allen is a little bit on that Dak spectrum where he gets so fired up for these big games that they just get off to a rough start. I don't know. I don't know how you fix it. Maybe it's more of Mike McCarthy trying to have a better opening game script to try to get the offense going. Maybe it's a better rushing attack where you can lean on your rushing attack early in games to kind of get the juices flowing before you start to really have to lean on Dak. I don't know, but it's certainly a problem. And there's been too many games in the playoffs and in the regular season against good opponents, especially on the road, where we've seen this.
Yeah, and that's the other thing you mentioned is it's not even just the playoffs, right? We've seen this kind of thing happen. I think the San Francisco game is in some ways the irregular season San Francisco game. Some of these games where we get in, it's the same sort of issue where Dak is too hyped, and it's like he's firing the ball, hot over people's heads. He's overthrowing it. His feet aren't in sync with his hips and his arms. It's a tough subject to talk about as a Cowboys fan, but I mean, we can't just sit there and pretend like it's not happening. It very clearly is.
I think Tony had some of these same issues, especially early on in his career. And maybe the thing is as you start to play more games and you start to play more playoff games, you get used to it a little bit, and maybe some of that wears off, but maybe it doesn't. Maybe the more that it happens, the more it gets into your head and you're not able to shake that. I don't know.
I think, what we've seen before in the past is more like quarterbacks who weren't ready for the moment, or quarterbacks who were scared, or just didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah, and that's not him. He's not scared.
That's not what we're seeing. Yeah, no. We're seeing Dak is too excited. He's too hyped for it.
Yes.
He's too ready to take on the challenge, and he's not. What we need is more Joe Montana, Joe Cool, calm, collected, and right. Yeah, exactly. Understanding what's going on. So I think maybe that's where the issue is. The question is, how does Dak solve that? I think that's a Dak journey at this point.
But I just want to be clear. I agree with you. I also don't think it's only a Dak thing. I think the coaching staff and the rest of the roster can help out in these areas, because we've seen plenty of other quarterbacks struggle early in playoff games, but their team or the coaching staff puts them in position to kind of rebound. That didn't happen against the Packers. It seemed like once things sort of went wrong after you were down 7-0 and punted on the first drive, things started to snowball in the Cowboys. You can't let that kind of stuff happen. We've seen the 49ers this year. They were down, was it 24-7 at halftime against the Lions, found a way to come back. I think the Cowboys have, as a team and as a franchise and as an organization, need to find a way to be a little bit more resilient in some of those moments rather than just saying, oh, shucks, here we go again.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think at a certain point it becomes a psychology problem for the whole team, right?
Absolutely.
Just because they've experienced this over and over again, and there is a tendency to fall into the "here we go again" situation.
All right, later. Let's talk about 2024 and beyond. Is it Dak Prescott or develop? We will discuss that next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar you transfer in from another retirement account with a 3% match. That is right. There is no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And for some legal info, claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are doing our exit interview, starting with the quarterback position. Landon, going into 2024, is it Dak Prescott or bust, or do you think it's time to maybe consider developing somebody else at this position?
Well, I think they need to do a split, right? I mean, I do think that one of the problems this team has had in the past is, kind of being held hostage in the negotiation because they don't have a long-term quarterback plan. The long-term quarterback plan is Dak Prescott. I do think that having, a kind of quarterback in-house that the Cowboys feel like they can develop a little bit in Trey Lance is someone that I don't know that it actually gives you leverage on Dak, but there's a psychological element that at least, hey, we've got a guy that if we had to move on from Dak Prescott, we could throw out there and see how he does. And, then if that doesn't work out, you end up going into the draft and trying a full restart, right? It's going to be interesting to see exactly how this plays out, right? Because the Cowboys have, some choices here. They can try to extend Dak Prescott and continue this down the road, which, honestly, I'm like 50-50 on at this point. I definitely want Dak Prescott as my quarterback next year, but depending on if this happens again next year, like at what point do we start moving on from this experiment, right? And so I think for next year, obviously Dak is your quarterback. There's no question about that. What's going to be interesting to see is how they handle his contract situation, right? Obviously he's owed a ton of money this year. I think somewhere in the number of $60 million, if I'm not mistaken. I think there are some roster mechanisms they can do to reduce that number a lot, even without having to extend him if they wanted. But ultimately, they're going to be on the hook for a ton of money and dead money coming up in the next year or two if they wanted to move on from Dak Prescott, which, that's the price of doing business with this situation. If the Cowboys sign another long-term deal with Dak, they need to do it with the understanding that, it's you've now suddenly kind of extended this window a little bit, and you're going to have to kind of come up with a new window by the end of that Dak Prescott contract, because you got other guys on expiring contracts by that point. It's going to be interesting to see what the Cowboys do here. They really are at an inflection point.
Mm-hmm.
If the Cowboys really wanted to ever be serious about trying to do something different, like truly kind of start and do something different, not even just this year, but in 2025, they kind of have to start laying the groundwork now in a lot of ways. And I think it kind of starts in some ways with Dak's contract and the negotiation. So as far as my personal preference, I I'm definitely all on board for Dak 2024. If this happens again in 2024, I mean, the problem is the ink will already be dry at that point. Either the Cowboys will have signed the contract with Dak extending him, or they won't have, and the likelihood of them being able to extend him after that is almost nothing.
One of the things that I'm going to be really interested in seeing is, do they consider bringing in a different quarterback to develop? Because we mentioned Trey Lance and his development. I mean, we just haven't seen a lot of Trey Lance in the NFL or in college. And by the way, he's on the final year of his rookie deal, and we have no idea. We literally have never seen him take a snap with a Cowboy jersey on, right? So by all accounts, this is a really good quarterback draft. And I'm not advocating for the Cowboys to draft one in rounds 2 or 3, but we could easily see 6 quarterbacks off the board in the top 40 picks. Yeah. And then you have your kind of pick of the litter in rounds 3, 4, and 5. With somebody like Spencer Rattler, who has 1,200 more passing attempts in college than what Trey Lance has in the NFL and college combined, would that be somebody that the Cowboys would be interested in throwing a dart at and being like, okay, we're not resetting the quarterback window a little bit, but we're grabbing a somebody else that's young that we can develop, that has several cheap years, on his deal in case we do have to move on from Dak. It gives us just something else. Or do they believe that Trey Lance is that guy that they want to develop, and they're willing to maybe try to give him a contract extension this year? I'm just going to be curious to see what they do there.
Yeah, I think ultimately it comes down to who is the benefactor, who's the person who's like shepherding Trey Lance into Dallas. Like, is this a Will McClay move, or is this a Mike McCarthy move, right? Because if this is a Will McClay
Jerry Jones move, Jerry Jones was very adamant about going out to get Trey Lance last year.
I guess, is it a front office move or is it a coaching move? Correct. I guess is the way to put it. Because if this is a coaching move, then his value and his worth may be going out the door when Mike McCarthy goes out the door, if that ever happens, right? If he's not, then I would imagine it would make sense to me that they would sign him to a small extension. I can't imagine it's going to be for very much money. And yeah, right. And then you use that as your kind of quarterback of the future. I just have a hard time. To me, again, like trying to draft someone like Spencer Rattler, like in the middle rounds, like that just seems like a misalignment with your team building timeline again.
And, right? Unless they're so out on Trey Lance, like they have just no interest in signing him to a deal.
Which I doubt that that's the case, right? Like, cause I feel like they haven't seen enough to be completely out on him yet, or completely in. I just feel like they've already paid for Trey Lance in the sense that they've traded to go get him.
This year's draft pick, right? This year's 4th round pick for him.
So I think that I imagine that they'll sign him to a short extension. But again, that is all going to be tied to what they're doing with Dak, or what their plan is with Dak, right? So I would imagine, though, that either way, they likely will give Trey Lance a little bit of an extension, if only for the idea that even if he doesn't help them at all in these negotiations, I think at the very least, you're going to see more of Trey Lance this year, definitely in training camp, definitely in the preseason games, maybe even in the regular season at some point. And if you can get Trey Lance to a point where he's your backup quarterback, then obviously you can save money on Cooper, and then on top of that, have somebody that you are truly developing as a potential to take over the mantle. Maybe not the quarterback of the future necessarily, but the year or two after you move on from Dak, if you ever move on from Dak, is you need a quarterback, and you may not necessarily have the draft ready to go with the variety of quarterbacks you want. So Trey Lance could be that bridge guy, while you're trying to wait on your specific targeted quarterback. And maybe you hit on something. Maybe he wins a couple games, and you see that you got something, because that's the thing that's interesting about Trey Lance, is that he does have kind of immense upside there. So he could be a bridge quarterback that has the upside to potentially develop into a guy that could be your full-time quarterback.
NFL free agency is just over a month away. We're going to have a lot of quarterback questions from the Cowboys going into the offseason. I imagine we'll get some news one way or another on Dak within the next 3 or 4 weeks, because we kind of have to, right? For the Cowboys to operate this offseason, they've got to either sign Dak to a contract, trade him, or if they just keep him at his current salary, you're not doing anything basically because all of your money is tied up into Dak. It's going to be a busy offseason for the Cowboys. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go download the podcast as well. Follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.